Open mic time, 1310 The Ticket's Jake Kemp joins me from Bad Radio fame, also on the Mavericks post-game shows. Jake, thank you so much for wearing a suit for our segment here.
Hey, thanks for having me, and I better get to see Clarice's big board before I get out of here tonight.
We will see what we can do about that.
Right.
So we are at the midway point of the season for the Mavericks, 5th place in the West, but fewer wins than last year. Are you more optimistic or pessimistic than a season ago?
I'm going to say optimistic primarily just because I don't think we've seen them play their best basketball yet. As you mentioned, last year at this point, they were 15 games over 500, barely hanging on to the 6th seed. Right now, just 5 over 500 and sitting there in the 5th seed. But I still think that the only chance this team has to be able to, tangle with some of those elites in the Western Conference is if Chandler Parsons can be consistently a dynamic, explosive offensive player. When he is, we see them be able to hang with teams like Cleveland. When he isn't, there's a real hole in their lineup. So I think they may have undersold how serious his injury was a little bit. It's kind of that thing that athletes deal with where if he hadn't come back until now, we would be saying, oh, this guy's a waste of money. If he does come back and he doesn't look quite right, then, he again, everyone's complaining about the contract. So to me, I still think that the jury is out on how impactful he can be for them offensively. So I'd say maybe a little bit more optimistic, also because, as I mentioned, the conference is down a little bit. Certainly at the top, you have, Golden State, Oklahoma City, and San Antonio look very, very nearly unbeatable. But I think the Mavericks, if they get a really great season down the stretch out of Parsons and he's in rhythm, I think they could beat a team like the Clippers in a 7-game series. So I'm going to say a little bit more optimistic.
It is interesting when you look at the numbers, offensively and defensively. They're right around the middle of the pack, but they're handling the ball really well. Very few turnovers, and other metrics suggest that this team can very well finish 5th, maybe 4th in the West.
Yeah, I think you bring up a point about the ball handling and just the incredible surprise that you've gotten out of both Darren Williams and Zaza Pachulia as far as their rebounding numbers. And, look, they're an above-average defense this year. We saw them Friday night be able to play a real grit-and-grind style game with Chicago, a game that I don't think a Mavericks team of last year, even a couple years ago, was capable of playing and winning. So I do think they're capable of playing a few different styles of basketball. They've gotten some level of, bench help out of guys like JaVale McGee and Raymond Felton, who I never would have seen that coming. So I do think they could their high side is probably 5, but how great would a first-round matchup with the Clippers be after the saga of the summer? I mean, that would just be – that's what you're in it for.
As long as you can avoid the Warriors and Spurs in the first round, I think that's what we're definitely looking for. Dirk Nowitzki shooting percentage dipping just a little bit, just a tad better from the three-point arc. Great free throw shooter still, 3rd lowest turnover percentage in all of the NBA. Seems like he's not slowing down at all, is he?
Yeah, I mean, he came out of the gate so incredibly hot, and I think that was really fortunate at a time for the Mavericks whenever, your two guys you're relying on pretty heavily in Matthews and Parsons, both those guys coming off major injuries. They needed Dirk to be so great for that first month and a half or so of the season. Slowed down a little bit at this point, but you saw what happened the other night at the end of regulation in that Cavs game. When they need to make a play, they're ISOing Dirk at the top of the key. Shumpert was able to make a great play on him, but Dirk is still their go-to guy. You would just like to see them down the stretch be able to lighten the load on him a little bit because you have to figure that when the summer gets here, if they're still playing, his legs are going to be feeling it.
And that has a lot to do with minutes, preserving him of sorts, and that's why he's able to do so well in the 4th quarter. And there are some big wins against the curryless Warriors for the Mavericks, Clippers at home and others, but there have been some bad losses as well. Can you evaluate Rick Carlisle's coaching up to this point?
I think even with the bad losses mixed in, I think Carlisle is an absolute warlock wizard. I think the fact that their offense runs as smoothly as it does with different players being inserted every year, the fact that their rebounding numbers are as high as they are, the fact that, I think you look at Zaza Pachulia careering right now, and a lot of that is credit to him and how hard he's worked this year, but you've got to put a lot of that on Carlisle. I mean, they're stretching him further than he's ever gone in his career, and at no point has his production fallen off. I think that Carlisle has got to be in the conversation. It's Pop 1, and it's Carlisle 2.
And you consider how many scoring plays are made off of timeouts. Rick Carlisle is always near the top of that list. That matters in this league. And also, as you mentioned, second games of a back-to-back, resting the starters. They're still winning a lot of those games as well, and those are the ones that keep the Mavericks in these standings.
Yeah, I mean, you reference I referenced Pachulia from the starters, but even McGee, a guy like McGee right now might be playing better than he ever has. So whenever they sit guys against the Rockets or against the Pelicans, they can be without 3 or 4 starters, and they can still, grind out those wins because the backup players are being coached well enough to where they can still roughly, approximate what the starters give them night to night.
Let's move on to football, and big debate with these Cowboys. What is the biggest position of need? Now, some want a backup quarterback with a 4th overall pick. A lot of mock drafts are forecasting a wide receiver, maybe a defensive lineman. What do you think is the biggest need here?
For me, it's absolutely quarterback, and I don't even really think of it as backup quarterback. I think of it both as your backup and your quarterback for the future. A lot of people talk about quarterback as that's just a play for the future. I think it's realistic at this point for Cowboy fans to expect Romo to miss 4 or 5, if you're lucky, games a season. And at that point, I'd rather that guy that gets in there for 4, 5, 6 games a year, I'd rather him be someone that they can develop for the long term. And, you have to figure that Cleveland is going to draft Jared Goff. And so you're going to be sitting there at 4, and you can ask yourself if you want Paxton Lynch. I personally still think that guy's a pretty good NFL prospect. But my opinion at this point, Ed, is I would back the Brinks truck of picks up. I would go to Tennessee. I would trade for the number 1 pick right now.
You really would?
I really would, because I think next year the Cowboys are still as bad as they were this year. They're going to play a last-place schedule next year. They'll probably be the favorite to win the division. So even if they're projected next year to win 7 or 8 games, they're not going to pick this high again. And if you want to trade up next year, let's say you're at 18, 19, it's going to cost you just as much to go to from 18, 19 next year up to 4 or 5 as it would to go from 4 to 1 this year. I think Goff is the truth, and I would do whatever it took to go get him. Now, they're definitely going to make you pay for it, but I would do that.
And it's interesting. I think what's really important to look at, and you mentioned that you like Jared Goff, is you're not always going to have a franchise quarterback every single season. Yeah, you're going to have some ranked very high. There's always going to be one picked very high in every single draft, but
Sure.
Is Jared Goff really the answer? Is Paxton Lynch really the answer? Maybe one of those 2nd or 3rd round guys can be developed over a couple of years.
Unfortunately, Ed, for me, the reason that I'm not so hot on that idea is I don't know if I trust their development to take a guy who might really need, because if you think about it, the coaching staff now didn't really develop Romo. He was somewhat developed by Sean Payton, by Bill Parcells. So to me, I would like to have the surest fire bet possible that when 9 hangs him up, there's another guy in there who is, of the pedigree that could be a franchise NFL quarterback. You like what you see out of Carson Wentz, a guy like that from FCS, but I would take all risk, as much risk out of the equation as possible, and go get one of those 2, blue chipper type quarterbacks. Hopefully they can sit for a couple of years, and then when they are eventually inserted into the starting lineup, it's behind a solid offensive line, and it's with elite wideout out there to throw to.
Let's talk about Romo for just a little bit. Troy Aikman had some really interesting commentary on the ticket and other places. He says that Romo's health is a big concern, not practicing a full week, missing more games last season than any other year of his career. And he's also one of the older quarterbacks in the NFL. It's not just his age. Comparatively, he's one of the older quarterbacks in the NFL. The backup quarterback position, as we talked about, you feel like this needs to happen right away. What is the shelf life for Romo, you think?
Yeah, it's just so hard to tell because before 2014, he's coming off the back surgery. I think that's the year when everyone thought, no way is he going to have any sort of juice this year. He's walking around out at camp. He looked really just kind of gingerly carrying himself around. He went out and played 15 games and they won 12. Then this year you feel like he's, probably on a pretty good place health-wise, and he's out by the 2nd game of the season. So I think it's such an unpredictable, such a high variance in what you can expect out of Romo's health that, to me, I would do everything I could to try to shore that situation up right now. Frankly, I don't think they'll take a quarterback high. I think the more likely situation is that Robert Griffin III ends up on this team next year. I think he's a way more reliable option than Manziel is at this point. Mm-hmm. Looks like Kaepernick will be staying in San Francisco. I wouldn't be surprised at all if RG3 is their backup next year and they're looking to him to try to be a starter by 2017, 2018.
Just a few seconds left. I want to get your Super Bowl 50 predictions. We got the Cardinals and Panthers here on Fox 4 next week. Denver Broncos host the New England Patriots. Who do you like in each game?
First off, in the AFC, just after watching that divisional round matchup wrap up, I don't see how you can't take the Patriots in that one. I mean, those two teams, Denver and Pittsburgh, both look like they were limping to the finish line. The Patriots look to be rounding into form a little bit down the stretch. And in the NFC, that's the dogfight you think you'll get. I have to look at, even though Seattle came back on today, I think Carolina is so dominant at every level. They're well coached. I think they have, maybe the 2nd best quarterback in the league right now. I'm going to go Panthers-Patriots, and at that point, I probably won't bet against the Patriots until Tom Brady's out of the league.
It's hard to at this point, right? Jake Kemp.
I'll take Jake Tempo.
Well, it's not Jack Kemp. I know that much. Jake Kemp of 1310, the Tickets Bad Radio and Mavericks post game. Thanks so much for dropping by.
I better see that iPad.
We're working on it.
All right, thanks, Ed.